Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Sophie Seiden. I'm the co-chair of the Next Gen Steering Committee at HFLS. Thank you again for dropping in. I'm going to hand it over to Eric Smith, who is one of our board members, and he will be doing a brief introduction, then we'll get started with the panel.
Thank you, Sophie. Welcome, and thank you, everyone, for joining us for tonight's event, The Power of Partnership, Supporting New York City's Immigrant Communities. My name is Eric Smith. I'm a member of HFLS's Next Generation Steering Committee, which is a group of young professionals who support, advocate for, and raise awareness for HFLS's work. For those of you attending for the first time, I'll give a quick introduction and some background on HFLS. So the society fosters financial stability and opportunity really for low and moderate income New Yorkers by providing access to safe, affordable credit in the form of interest-free loans. HFLS loans make an immediate, concrete impact on the lives of our borrowers, allowing them to invest in their education, start businesses, meet emergency needs, just to name a few. These loans are a safety net for people who need urgent financial help, as well as an economic ladder for people seeking to build a brighter future for themselves and their families. Tonight's event highlights the challenges faced by New York City's diverse immigrant communities and how on-the-ground partnerships make it possible for HFLS to assist people from all over the world and in a number of different ways here in New York City. HFLS has been non-sectarian since its founding in 1892, serving people of all religious and cultural backgrounds. The immigrant experience is really at the heart of the HFLS story. The organization was founded by and for immigrants. And today, more than half of HFLS's borrowers are immigrants, coming from over 70 countries around the world. Collaborations with various organizations around the city help HFLS reach communities that might not otherwise learn about HFLS, and helps us better understand the challenges that these communities face today, and ultimately to create loan programs that really address these specific challenges. Representatives from 3 of HFLS's valued organizational partners are here tonight to share the challenges faced by the immigrant communities they serve. So our panelists tonight are Jose Leon, Supervising Attorney for Naturalization at Catholic Migration Services, Violetta Schmulenson, Assistant Executive Director at the Jewish Community House of Bensonhurst, and Jose Miranda, Director of Programs at Chhaya Community Development Corporation. So now I'll turn it over to our moderator, my fellow Next Gen Steering Committee member, Andrew Dansker, to get the conversation started.
Great, thank you, Eric. Thank you for that great introduction, and thank you, Sophie, as well. That was great background on HFLS that you gave. I don't know if you can hear in the background, my 8-month-old daughter is also a big HFLS supporter, and she's cheering loudly from the sidelines. So if you hear her, it's support that you're hearing. Jose and Violetta, thank you for taking the time to be on the panel tonight. I really appreciate it. I know everyone appreciates it, so thank you. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to have about 45 minutes to hear from our panelists, and then we're going to have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. So while we're chatting, if you're in the audience, you should feel free to click on the Q&A button, which is at the bottom in the middle of your screen, and submit a question. And if there's room for it during the panel, we'll include it. Otherwise, we'll circle back to it in the Q&A at the end, which we will reserve time for. And that'll be it. So we'll just kick it off, I guess. I'd like to start, Eric gave us a great introduction to HFLS. I'd like to start off by getting an introduction to each of your 3 organizations with just a basic overview. What does your organization do? What's the community that it serves? And just a little bit of overview so that people in the audience can understand your perspective and your client base. Maybe I was going to say, Jose, you can start, but that doesn't really narrow it down. So maybe Violetta, you can start, and that way we avoid confusion.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I am from the Edith and Carl Marks JCH of Bensonhurst, as Andrew and Eric introduced. We are a legacy organization, and we are a 90-plus-year-old JCC, which is a Jewish community center based in southwestern Brooklyn. Bensonhurst is a community, and as every community center, we really serve the ever-changing needs of the clients who surround us and come to us for services. That being said, I guess the claim to fame for our organization is that from the early 1990s until about the 2000s, we helped resettle about roughly 50,000 immigrants arriving from the former Soviet Union, and the community has really stuck with us for the 2+ decades since then. But of course, we really serve a diverse community, and Bensonhurst is a very diverse community, and so are the 30+ zip codes that we have clients coming from. So our staff speak about a dozen languages, and we really service clients everything from youth and child care services to really basic human service needs. So citizenship application process, really strong partnership with legal and housing referrals, comprehensive case management, including benefits screening, a very robust workforce and adult literacy program. We have about 500 students a semester studying English with us. So there's really, when we talk about ourselves, we really say we're a one-stop shop, and that's who the J is. It's from cradle to grave, welcoming everybody in, and really making sure to meet all of their needs on site. And that includes during the pandemic, and Hebrew Free Loan Society has been such a critical partner of ours throughout that time in really establishing a unit of service that helps us move clients. And when I say clients, I mean immigrants, new immigrants, through the acculturation all the way to the self-sufficiency process, which is really the goal or the core of what we do at this agency.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Jose Leon, maybe you can share a little bit about your organization.
Sure. Thank you for having me on the panel tonight. My name is Jose Leon. I'm a supervising attorney for the naturalization unit at CMS. CMS is a nonprofit organization based in Brooklyn and in Queens. We have an office in Sunnyside, Queens, and an office in downtown Brooklyn. We have 3 major areas of practice. We do housing law, we do workers' rights law, and the biggest practice that we do is immigration law. Within the immigration unit, we do affirmative filings applications. So people who are petitioning for relatives abroad, who are US citizens and lawful permanent residents, people who are looking to become permanent residents. We also do all of the religious visas for the Roman Catholic priests and nuns who come to the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens to work in the different communities in that those 2 boroughs. Then we also represent people in removal proceedings in our removal defense team. So we have a lot of clients who are before court trying to stay in the United States. So we have a lot of asylum applications, both affirmative and defensive asylum applications, special immigrant juvenile status cases for children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents, U visas for victims of crime, T visas for victims of trafficking, different waivers, cancellation of removal for lawful permanent residents and non-lawful permanent residents. And pretty much anything that is before the immigration court, except detained work. So we do not represent people who are currently in immigration detention. The last team, and really the one that I'm representing tonight, is the naturalization team. The naturalization team is pretty small, but we like to say that we have a big impact. And the reason for that is that we don't shy away from any of the complicated cases that other organizations perhaps cannot take on. So we do a lot of applications for people who are who have a disability and cannot take the English and civics portions of that examination. So we work with doctors to get the correct forms completed and done correctly, so that USCIS, the agency approving them, will grant them naturalization. We do about, in regular times before Corona, we do anywhere from 550 to 600 applications in a year. And we also do all kinds of complicated cases related to criminal histories, complicated immigration histories, pretty much anyone who is eligible to naturalize and wants to work with us for free, we will take on the case. The way that we became acquainted with Hebrew Free Loan Society and the program that we're working together with Hebrew Free Loan Society is last year there was a push from the previous administration to change the fees that the naturalization application costs. So currently it's $725. They wanted to raise that to $1,170, and they wanted to eliminate fee waivers and fee reductions. A lot of our clients are low-income New Yorkers who would typically receive either a fee waiver or a fee reduction. And we started to think creatively. We started trying to reach people in New York, and we were connected through the New York Lawyers for Public Interest with the Hebrew Free Loan Society. And we came up with this plan where HFLS would after we do a screening and determine eligibility for our clients, they would be able to apply for an interest-free loan to apply for their naturalization application. So initially we thought it was going to be $1,170. Those fee reductions and fee waivers are still in place right now, so that didn't go through from the last administration. But there are a lot of our clients who don't have $725 to apply for citizenship. But you know, these loans really help these folks be able to apply for citizenship and get all the benefits that that citizenship brings with it. So far, the program has been very successful. Our clients are very appreciative. We've also told about the plan to, or about this loan program to other organizations in New York City who are also having conversations with HFLS, and hopefully there will be more people who can benefit from this wonderful program that HFLS does. So
I appreciate that. That's great. You mentioned a couple of things I just want to clarify, just because I didn't understand them. Affirmative and defensive asylum, I think was the distinction you made. What's the difference between the two?
Affirmative asylum is usually for people who enter the United States, most likely on a tourist visa, and within 1 year of entering the United States, they express a fear of returning to their country of origin and therefore affirmatively apply for asylum before USCIS, before the asylum office. Now, the asylum office has jurisdiction to review those cases and to grant asylum. But if they feel that asylum is, you know, the standard isn't met, then what they do is that they refer it to immigration court. And immigration court is a little bit different from an interview. It's more, you know, the government is trying to deport the person, trying to say that the person doesn't meet the standard. And so that's what defensive asylum is. So a person might find him or herself before immigration court because the asylum application wasn't successful at the immigration asylum office, or it might be people who present themselves at the border and you know, express a fear of returning to their countries, go through a process where they are interviewed and it's determined whether they have a colorable claim for asylum. And if they do, then they're placed in removal proceedings, which is again, before an immigration judge. So that is the main distinction. But if a judge grants asylum, whether they were referred to immigration court by the asylum office or whether they presented themselves at the border and then ended up before an immigration judge, asylum is the same for both of those. And it's also the same for people who are granted asylum before the asylum office affirmatively.
Understood. Understood. Okay. Well, thank you for that summary. I appreciate that very much. Jose, can you tell us a little bit about Chhaya and the community you serve and the organization a little bit, please?
Sure, yeah. Chhaya is a community development corporation. We were founded in Queens about 20 years ago, primarily to serve the housing needs of the South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities. And so that's what we're most known for. We have a pre-purchase program where we help immigrant community members understand the home purchase process, apply for any types of state and private grants for down payment assistance, and connect them to various mortgage products. We have a foreclosure prevention program also to help immigrants and other community members stay in their homes. And on the tenant side, we work on tenant counseling and also tenant organizing. So we founded the first Bangladeshi tenant union in the country, and about a dozen or so other tenant associations throughout Queens. We have 2 offices in Jackson Heights and Richmond Hill, and in recent years have really expanded beyond just the housing space. So we also offer immigration legal services, ESOL classes for English learners, and increasingly have been working on an asset building program. So offering financial counseling services, access to peer lending circles where folks can start to build some of their credit up, and also a small business program. And that's where we started our relationship with HFLS. During COVID, a lot of immigrant-owned businesses found programs like PPP or other loan and grant programs really onerous to try to apply for and get through. And so we started a partnership with HFLS to provide them access to interest-free loans to help them pay off their back rent, which a lot of folks are struggling with right now. And that's been really successful. We've worked with close to a dozen businesses and helped them apply and have given them access to capital. And it's in fact been so successful that we are now in touch with HFLS about a home repair program to help us on the foreclosure prevention side, which I can talk a little bit more about later.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you mentioned the PPP program. And actually, when you and I spoke before the program, you told me something which I didn't know at all, or had never considered. I'm ashamed to say the PPP documents are only available in English, which I didn't know.
Yeah, because we a lot of the applications had to go through financial institutions. They were only available in English. A lot of the information online was only in English. We were able to get some things translated, but it's been really difficult for to even share information about the program with some of the immigrant communities that we work with. South Asian communities aren't as large as Spanish speakers or some East Asian communities, and so a lot of financial institutions and the government doesn't always translate into languages like Tibetan and Nepali.
Yeah, and it was something I hadn't considered. One of the things I was going to ask in this program was, what are some of the challenges that your members and clients regularly face? And I think what's interesting for me in learning about your 3 organizations is that the answer kind of comes through fairly clearly by the fact that everyone's doing immigration support, everybody's doing housing support, everybody's doing some kind of economic support. I think you start to see very clearly and very quickly the pillars of what the challenges are, or the main challenges, let's say, of being a low income immigrant in New York City. Jose, do you think there are unique challenges in your community that are worth mentioning?
Jose me or Jose Leon?
Well, we'll
Sorry.
stick with you because you got the mic.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, again, I think language access is a big one. You know, and also I think, unfortunately, a lot of the communities we serve are sort of like newer waves of immigration. They don't have a strong support system here in the US yet. You know, the waves of immigration have been over the last 15 to 20 years. And so a lot of people are in the same boat. There are not more established immigrants here or family members who sort of have a foothold in the country that can help them navigate systems. Unfortunately, you know, the US, you know, whether it's on the corporate side or the government side is full of bureaucracy and paperwork and processes and waiting. And so navigating that can be really discouraging. Another thing we've seen is just lack of digital literacy or access to internet. And, you know, the pandemic really affected that greatly. You know, events like this are moving online, information is moving online, applications are moving online. So how do we connect folks to these services without stable internet access at home, or their only internet access being their smartphone, I think is another challenge.
Yeah, that is interesting. Violetta, I think you mentioned that that you're doing ESL languages, also ESL classes also. Do you, or English as a second language, do you see the same challenges that Jose is describing with language access and other similar challenges, or do you see different challenges being faced by your community?
Sure. So as you've mentioned, we do work with a low-income community that even prior to COVID, which, as we all know, has really disproportionately impacted those who are in the lower rungs, who are the most vulnerable. I think that language, you know, people live below more than half the clients we serve, and we touch about 15,000 people's lives a year. More than half the clients we serve live below the federal poverty line before COVID, and COVID has really thrown that into a tailspin. And I think a lot of the same crises that I'm sure Jose and Jose are seeing in their communities in terms of housing and the digital divide and the loss of employment and a tripling rise in domestic violence, and all of those factors that we have been dealing with through the pandemic have really been heightened because of it. But I think that what we are seeing the worst, I mean, we've been like data obsessed during this pandemic because we just really you can't really assume how this is, you know, what's happening to clients. You really have to track and analyze and hear the concerns and the needs. So the two figures that have really stood out to us is that more than 60% of our community has been reporting the loss of at least one income due to COVID. And yes, the economy seems to be, you know, getting significantly better quickly, but for those who were mid to low wage workers, they have been the worst hit, and when they fall off the ladder, they fall off many rungs off the ladder because their language abilities are not to the level, and they don't have more than one digital device in their home, and it takes them so much longer to learn how to navigate it. You know, and they have, you know, they don't have a savings to fall back on. So all of these things already put them at a significant disadvantage. God forbid, not even having, you know, a status in this country to help them along the way, which makes it even worse. So I think that what we're seeing that is a major concerning fact. And then the other one, which is for us has been huge, is that more than half the community is reporting some level of concern for mental health for them or a family member. And this is an immigrant community that has never wanted to discuss any kinds of mental health challenges with us, even when we start the conversation. So the fact that they are mentioning it themselves is really red flag when we think about all the people who are not saying it, and that sometimes when clients come to us in this past year, they're in such a level of crisis that it takes our case managers over an hour or two just to understand what the crisis is, because people are in such a state of disarray and there's so many compounding issues. So I think that obviously in the communities that we work with, and I'm sure in others that are really already fragile and disadvantaged, this crisis has really just toppled them down. That's what we've seen, and recovery will be a very long road back.
Thank you for sharing that, Violetta. Jose, do you agree with what Jose and Violetta have said so far? Do you see the same challenges among your clients, or do you see a different set of challenges?
I see a lot of similarities, particularly from a naturalization perspective. Our office had to go completely virtual, which means that all of our contacts with our clients have to be online. And we found that a lot of our, especially older clients, don't have even a smartphone. So trying to get an application done when someone doesn't have those, like a Gmail account or a smartphone or anything, we have to do everything over the phone. We have to mail things. Things just take a lot longer. Definitely, before the pandemic, I would say about 80% of our clients would require fee waivers. And we have seen clients who perhaps were in a better position before the pandemic now being under the federal poverty guidelines and having to actually request a fee waiver in order to apply for naturalization. Definitely, I think that from a removal defense perspective, so I also practice in that team. I've seen that a lot of my clients were actually very sick during a large part of 2020. Several of them were in the hospital for extended periods of time. Some of them passed away and didn't get to become U.S. citizens. So we see how disproportionate the pandemic was in terms of these lower income folks, like Violetta was saying, and how terrible this has been, how terrible it will be, and the recovery is going to take a lot longer than for other folks. But yes, I definitely see the same challenges: housing challenges, health challenges, technology challenges. Any challenge, you name it, our clients are facing it.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that recovery question later on. You mentioned briefly in your opening remarks a little bit about how you work with HFLS now, and I think it was in reference to interest-free loans for asylum fees. Is that right?
For naturalization fees.
Naturalization fees. Got it. I'm just curious to understand a little bit about how did that program come about? I understand the need. I think that that's evident from what you described. How did you even start that process with HFLS?
So the Trump administration was very, very difficult. It was kind of a disaster area for us for 4 years. We were kind of just waking up every morning and just wondering what was new and what was, what horrible thing they were going to do next. And one of the last things that they wanted to do was across the board increase fees for all sorts of applications. So you just actually by mistake said, "Oh, an asylum case that would have a fee." So very few countries in the world, I think only another country, have asylum fees. The United States does not have fees to apply for asylum, but that was one of the things that the Trump administration wanted to do. All of the different applications that are already quite expensive were revised, and it was proposed to raise, for example, the naturalization fee is $725. They wanted to raise it to $1,170. So they warned us about that pretty, early on, about 6 months before. We kind of had an idea that that was the proposal. And we really freaked out because, like I said, 80% of our clients need these fee waivers, these fee reductions in order to apply for naturalization. And so we started thinking, okay, we need to find a way so that if these fees go up, people will still be able to apply for naturalization. And so we spoke with our partners at New York Lawyers for Public Interest, and they said, well, we know of a great organization called HFLS, and let's just start talking to them and seeing what could be done if this is a program that could work between the naturalization team and HFLS. So for about, I would say, 4 to 5 months, we worked together to kind of come up with how this whole plan was going to work, how the whole program was going to work. And right before the fees were supposed to go up, it was enjoined, so it never actually went through.
Right.
And so right now, the people that we're able to help with this program are people who, for example, maybe filed their taxes, their 2019 taxes, where they were, working, they were making a lot, not a lot, but they were making enough so that they wouldn't have to request a fee waiver. Maybe their situation is still a little bit fluid. They don't know, they made less than the previous year. So they're not eligible for a fee waiver or a fee reduction, but they don't have $725 just hanging out like they perhaps might have had before the pandemic. And so we're seeing those people benefiting from the program.
I appreciate that. So Violetta, if I remember correctly, piggybacking on that conversation that I just started with Jose, I think that your organization has been partnered with HFLS for a long time, doing a variety of things together. Can you tell us what are the programs that you partner on with HFLS?
Sure. HFLS has been a partner of the JCHs for decades. Prior to the pandemic, of course, HFLS was on site. The staff was on site monthly here to help clients, along with our staff, of course. And we would have a huge list of clients who were ready to meet with every month, apply for the loans, whether they're personal or for educational or for crisis. We also did have a small business micro enterprise program. We had a large business community, and it was really critical to moving clients, as we do with everything, towards self-sufficiency in that way. And those are some of our most critical programs that still continue, even though they're not on site during this pandemic. The team has been on site and have been really connected to HFLS throughout. I think that I was speaking with Andrew in preparing for today's panel, and I shared that we have seen just an unprecedented amount of crisis this past year, and one of the, which has really just been compounded, as I said, because of the COVID crisis in New York City. And one of our clients, whose daughter just attended our volleyball classes, whose husband had received a small business loan through our partnership with HFLS, he unfortunately passed away in a really tragic accident this past summer. And the loan obviously still remained, even though there was no income coming in from the business, because the business had to be wrapped up. And as we were helping the family process everything in support of counseling and emergency cash assistance and childcare programs and everything that that needed to happen, the mother had mentioned us that this was in her financial assessment, this was one of the things that was really challenging. And we had reached out to HFLS, and it took one phone call, and it was agreed upon that the family wouldn't have to repay the loan. And if I can share, the level of excitement that this client had, I mean, there were tears. This was really a make or break situation, because the mother was, had lost her employment due to COVID and the tragic passing away in the family. And I think that level of cultural competency and really understanding each client and a real partnership to work together to make sure the clients go from point A to, onward on their process is really what has made that partnership special. And obviously, as the crisis continues and as things change, we are HFLS staff is always on site here to meet with our staff, to speak with our clients, to really understand what are the challenges. For example, some of the challenges were about having two co-signers, so we moved to one. So that we're really understanding the needs and the barriers and removing them so the clients can get the resources they need. And in our conversations about that, housing has become such a crisis in our community, and people are coming with so many months behind in arrears that there's just no way they can recover from this. And we've been discussing this with Hebrew for Loan Society and how we could possibly work together, and also even things like the immigration the fees for the citizenship prep, which you've usually, as Jose said, it's usually been clients who are getting public benefits, so they get the voucher there, to be covered. But now we are seeing clients who were kind of okay and are no longer okay, and so that they do want to get their status because it really makes a difference now in terms of access to things, but they could not, even that is impossible. So the fact that we can share those needs with HFLS and really work together to see what's going on the ground and to adapt and to pivot, because I think for all of us on the ground, this crisis has been about how to pivot to meet the needs and to meet our clients where they're at.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to, before Jose, I want to ask you about Chhaya and your partnership as well, but I also want to mention to the audience that if you have questions for the panelists, you should feel free to submit them. Jose, what about your partnership with HFLS? How does Chhaya work with HFLS? What do those programs look like?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we started working with HFLS to really support our small businesses, giving them access to capital at a really critical time during the pandemic when landlords have been harassing them. We had one client who was a small business owner, single mom. She had started a restaurant kind of within a restaurant, doing some catering services, and was able to save up money and expand. But because of some issues with Con Ed, despite getting a location, building it out, it sat kind of dormant for about 8 months throughout larger part of 2019 into the early part of 2020. And she was finally able to reopen in the summer, but she at that point, had been in her location for almost a year and owed some rent, and the landlord, began harassing her. And Chhaya stepped in and connected them to legal services. But in order to provide some type of abatement, the landlord really wanted a lump sum payment. So we were able to connect her with HFLS to take out an interest-free loan in order to provide that lump sum payment to try to negotiate her rent down. And because she didn't open until the pandemic, she didn't qualify for PPP or other types of assistance. So this was really a great lifeline.
That's an incredibly, it's a great story. It's also an incredibly New York thing that you mentioned, that she opened a restaurant within a restaurant first. I don't know if that's worth describing what that means, but that feels like a pretty unique concept for maybe anyone who's listening from outside New York.
Yeah, we see that a ton, especially here in Jackson Heights, where real estate's pretty expensive, commercial real estate, and we see storefronts and restaurants just subdivided and subdivided. So you might see, again, a restaurant within a restaurant, or you might walk into a barber shop and there's a cell phone store in the back, or a furniture store. Things like that. So it's something we see a ton of, because again, the real estate here is just so expensive that people need to be able to make do.
It's pretty incredible. I'm curious, one of the things I think that you mentioned a little bit earlier about access, maybe you didn't phrase it this way, but I think you were alluding a little bit to the proportion of your clientele that's unbanked or that doesn't have access to traditional banking services. I'm curious to know if that's what you meant earlier, and if that's part of the situation that you help address, and if the work with HFLS and the other economic support work that you do helps people on ramp to traditional banking services.
Yeah, fortunately, the business clients that we work with tend to have commercial bank accounts. The challenge for them really is that they don't provide the type of culturally and linguistically appropriate services for them, right? So they don't understand that an informal immigrant-owned business doesn't necessarily have a payroll register, payroll system to show what those costs are, and so they aren't able to loan to them or even support them with products. So HFLS in one way is more flexible, right? We talked about some of the documentation and things before. So it does provide them access to capital in that way that a traditional bank or a traditional lender often won't.
Yeah, And since we're engaged in this moment, I'm curious, going forward, right, coming out of this crisis, the area where you operate, of course, was that, you're in Elmhurst, near Elmhurst. You're at the epicenter nationally of the crisis, especially the early part. What are the biggest challenges that your client base is going to face coming out of this? What do you see?
Yeah, I think across the community, we're seeing, both for commercial tenants and for residential tenants, just a ton of rental that tends to be people's greatest expense in New York City. A huge proportion of the population is rent burdened, and it's even worse in immigrant communities. And so trying to keep people in their homes is a big focus for us moving forward, and trying to keep businesses in their locations is a big emphasis point for us moving forward. And, luckily, I mentioned earlier, we're working on a program with HFLS for home repairs. We have, elderly clients on fixed income who want to downgrade their homes, but are unable to because, they may have a leaky roof or other repairs that need to be made in order for them to sell it. But on fixed income, where do they get access to the money that they need, the $20,000-$30,000 in some cases to fix a hole in the roof or something? And that's where a product like HFLS's home repair loan really help folks just have that kind of economic stability and housing stability, and not have to worry about where's that mortgage payment going to be coming from.
Yeah, it sounds like in the past, the work with HFLS has, in a way, been growth oriented, right? It's about helping businesses grow, small business loans. And then, in a way, going forward, it's a little bit recovery oriented, right? Looking at housing loans, about salvaging a situation, forestalling foreclosure. It's an interesting shift in perspective almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Violetta, I think when you and I spoke before, some of the challenges that Jose just highlighted sounded very similar to what you are seeing in South Brooklyn. Is that true?
Yes, very much. I mean, we are seeing, we've been doing quite a bit of emergency cash assistance, and we are seeing people coming in. I mean, housing is the absolute #1 need, and people who are coming in over $20,000 in arrears, and with no yet stability, at the moment. So how could they even, come back towards it? So I think it's a major issue. At some point at the height of the crisis, we were seeing massive food insecurity. It's definitely a bit better, but that even term was new for our community. We hadn't gotten into that. I think hopefully schooling is kind of stabilizing, but public school and childcare institutions being closed, 1/4 of the families we see are single parents. So, even if people were able to retain their jobs without reliable and consistent childcare, there was no way they were going to be going back to work tomorrow. So I think that all of these issues all together really impact those who, again, are at the, were already struggling prior to the pandemic. And these are some of the biggest challenges, but we truly feel that getting people back to work is the priority for us as an organization. Our workforce efforts are really where the focus is going to be moving forward. I mean, we have dozens of vocational programs, and even our adult literacy is skewed towards employment, and we place hundreds of clients a year and help them with retention services. And I think that, and we specialize specifically in putting people back to work who are immigrants, and we are hardest to place immigrants into employment. And I think that's the priority, because that really, everything else that we do is to stabilize them so that we can get them back to work, remove the barriers from it. And I think even Hebrew for Loan has acted as one of the stabilizers to get them, into a place that they can focus and they can go to work and there can be a boost in the household. And that's, I think, the most important work that we can be part of as an organization right now with our cultural competency. And I think it will help both the small businesses and medium, to large businesses, and also the clients who've really been deeply impacted through this crisis.
You mentioned something about self-sufficiency earlier, and it's clearly a huge emphasis in your work. I'm curious, and we got a question from the audience. I'm also curious to hear the answer, but the question was, how do you focus on the children of immigrants? And the second part of the question was, how do you ensure that the next generation is set up for financial success and is not trapped in that same fragile position that their parents were started out in? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So, 50% of what the agency does is youth focused. So we have a large day camp, a preschool, an after school program. I want to say this is an exceptional year. And we've been opened and have been running a full day childcare program for school age kids from 8 in the morning to 6 p.m. every day. And I think what we continue to say in this community is that our parents have language barriers, did not grow up in this educational system. They really just cannot support their kids through this. And that before, if it was, 3 hours a day of after school services, that is not our role anymore. And we are basically the providers this year of distance learning. Our staff are on the parent teacher conferences because they know more what is going on with the kids than the parents who barely speak the language or really just don't have time. And the parents have said, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be at work the next day. There wouldn't be food on the table. And the big goal for us is that our kids are already disadvantaged, that they do not get set back even more because of this crisis, because of the fact that they have not been able to step foot back into a school building in a year. So that's first. We also have a really robust teen department at the JCH, and we really focus on working with teens and preparing them for the world of work, financial literacy. We're a summer youth employment provider, and we place about 800 kids annually, 16 to 21 years old, into their first job experience over the summer and then during the year, and they get paid a minimum wage for that, which is a huge economic burst for the family. SYP was pulled away this summer. We worked diligently with many of our supporters, and we are actually able to place 250 kids in in-person placements in the summer and in the fall, and they each got a $1,500 stipend for working from us, which was really a form of cash assistance to the family. It was just critical skills. So we worked so hard with our kids into getting them into colleges, helping them with the application process, covering vouchers, helping them apply for the vouchers. It's a big segment of our work, and it's a personal issue for me, first generation. So I always talk about the fact that just because you were born and raised in this country, if you have no parents who can network, can get you your first job, can get you that internship, can help guide you through that process, it is a disservice if we're not working with our kids to get them. And that is a huge focus for us. And if anything, during this pandemic, what we've learned is that the teens were really the information and the gatekeepers for their families because of the digital divide and because of the ever-changing info. And sometimes the case management starts with the kids and really works through that. So it's tough being a kid of immigrants, and it is a high priority area. And we are definitely, doing what we can in our community, but these kids have also been really set back. I would not want to be a high school senior last year trying to figure out anything about college this year. So I think we're all heading in the right direction, but it was it was really tough there for a minute.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful, that's a wonderful part of your work. I didn't expect such a robust answer, and that's really wonderful to hear. I'm curious to know, Jose, if there's specific child-focused work or specific work preparing the first generation to help the second generation that you think is worth mentioning. Either one of you. It's hard to follow that answer from Violetta because that was a pretty robust programming dedicated to children, and that's pretty amazing and wonderful. I'm curious, Violetta, you mentioned that for you, it's also a personal thing to work with the first generation kids. I'm curious, before we wrap up, what is the most meaningful part of your work? And that question comes from the audience.
There are so many meaningful parts. I am incredibly proud that I've been at this organization. I was a kid here. I grew up here. I was a camper and a counselor and the camp director. Yes, the AD now, but I say this all the time, that I don't think I've been more proud of our work than I have been this past year. Our team has been on site every day since July in person, putting their own lives and their families at risk. And we've had, plenty of COVID cases and walk through them and, learn how to navigate that. But for us, this year has really given us, I think, purpose. Many of our staff are in the same positions as our clients. They're definitely, struggling and had their own family members dealing with the same things that they're dealing with. And I think for us, we knew that we were the only thing standing between our clients and utter despair and destitution. And so I'm just incredibly proud of the work that we did this year, of how many clients we've assisted, get out of crisis. Yes, the need is immense. It's a tide at times, but the team remains dedicated. They remain positive, and how much we've been able to pivot. And what I say is not even just pivot, but lean into the crisis, and how much we've had to let go of things that we thought were important, and be ready to react to the new needs because they were emerging. And I think it's just as an organization this year, we weren't afraid of the crisis. We ran in and did the work and rolled up our sleeves. And we hope, even though the recovery will be long for this community, and I don't even know if we're in recovery yet, to be honest, to talk about it that way, but we know that the work that has been done this year will make it that much quicker, and has really, kept people away from the lowest points that they can get to. Again, none of this would have been possible without our partners, Hebrew Philon being part of it, and really our supporters and our funders have really stepped up and worked with us, because obviously, organizations have suffered as well, but just it's been meaningful to just be there. I think that to just being there is a big part of it.
It's wonderful. That's really wonderful. Jose, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to know if you have any comments you want to add about the meaningful parts of your work and the personal nature of your work, because I'm out of time and I want to turn it to Eric to wrap us up, but I want to give you the opportunity to answer that question because I thought it was a good one from the audience.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. So like I said before, I have removal defense cases and I have naturalization cases. And the naturalization cases are the happy part of immigration, because most of the time when I'm dealing with asylum cases or special immigrant juvenile status cases, the sadder and the more tragic the story, the better my case is. So the fact that I can help people achieve their dream of becoming a US citizen is just wonderful. Seeing 92-year-old ladies go to their interviews and I go with them and they become US citizens is just really, really rewarding. I also just want to say that our staff has been incredible throughout this really terrible year. Just to give you an idea, we've been able to do almost 200 intakes, so eligibility intake interviews, completely remote since January, and that's saying a lot. So just the fact of seeing how resilient the team has been is really, really encouraging and amazing, and I'm very, very proud and happy to work for an organization like CMS, and to have partners like HFLS and others who help us really achieve the work that we do.
That's wonderful. I appreciate that. Jose, you have the last word. Jose Miranda.
Yeah, great. I think for me, similar to what's been said, the resiliency of our team has been amazing. When the pandemic happened, as you mentioned, Andrew, we were in the epicenter of the epicenter. Elmhurst Hospital is literally 3 blocks from the office where I'm at today. And immediately our staff, shifted their priorities and, figured out how to make the work remotely, and, shifted priorities. We added new programs like cash grants and food distribution, and everyone just rolled up their sleeves and was ready to make it happen. And I think, a second piece that I think is equally important, Chhaya's mission is to build power in the South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities. And, I've talked a lot about direct service here. But at the end of the day, the work that we do is simply to help people survive, right? It's a band-aid, and we do, and our staff holds us accountable to do a lot of advocacy work, to do community organizing, to really empower the community to fight for systemic change and the help that we need for greater resources within the community.
I appreciate that very much. All right, well, Jose, Violetta, I think it's been very illuminating to hear from you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time and your willingness to share. And I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who's going to wrap us up.
Thanks, Andrew. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And a special thanks to our three panelists, Jose, Violetta, and Jose, for sharing their work and their insight into the challenges faced by New York City's immigrant communities today. I definitely did, and I know we all learned a lot from each of you, and we're incredibly supportive of what you're looking to accomplish and what you're supporting. Your work in partnership with HFLS is deeply valued and inspiring. So we hope this sparked everyone's interest in learning more about and getting more involved in HFLS. Here's one exciting way to get started soon. Join us for a special HFLS event on the evening of June 8th with our CEO, Rabbi David Rosen. We'll talk with Broadway veteran Jeffrey Seller, the producer of Hamilton and Rent, about bringing Broadway and theater back to New York City following the pandemic. That sounds fun, both the event and going to Broadway shows again. The event is virtual and free of charge. Details will be on the HFLS website. Hope to see and hear from all of you soon. Thank you and good night.